Blending 60s and 70s soul music with Indo-Pakistani folk music, you've created an entirely new genre known as brown skin soul. What influences drove you to create this, and why?
Well, I created that because I grew up in an atmosphere where we listened to a lot of different types of music, but particularly those two styles were very prevalent in my household. Um, my mother and father are immigrants from India, and I think that a common strand with a lot of immigrants is that they have a nostalgia, a hankering for their homeland, and but there's also the desire to assimilate. So for them, they really enjoyed. They took a lot of comfort and solace in listening to soul music because they could relate to it. They could relate to the themes of loss and despair because they'd been through so much in their lives already at that point. And of course, the film music and the folk music and the light classical music of India and Pakistan was also something that they were attached to. That's the nostalgia element. I just feel lucky that I grew up in a household that, where we listened to all these things and, creating this genre and, doing this music is pretty much just the sum of my own existence, really.
What was your earliest musical experience as a child, and how did that shape where you are today?
It was either Bill Withers, Lean on Me, or MC Hammer, Can't Touch This. It was one of those two. I remember both of those experiences really well. I remember the MC Hammer hearing Can't Touch This because that was, just going on at the time, and I had these pair of black, very 90s pants, and I would, take my dad's beeper, his pager around, I can't touch this, and I would just dance around with it and just grew. And then Bill Withers, Lean on Me, I remember hearing that, and I remember being so transformed by that. I remember the electric current that went up and down my body, hearing this man's voice and hearing his expression, hearing the simplicity of the song. I mean, I didn't think of it in all those terms back then. I just really was attracted to it. And, music has always been part of my life from the earliest time. I've always been attracted to it. I've always been drawn to it. I've always found solace in it. I've always found comfort in it.
How do you use your music and your voice to raise awareness to America's political climate? And why do you feel it's important to do so?
Well, I think it's the best thing one can do. I feel that if you do have the gift of music, if you do have any artistic proclivities, I think you have a responsibility to say what you feel about what's going on around you. And I think that the greatest musicians, whether it would be Beethoven, whether it be Coltrane, whether it be Mehdi Hasan, whether it be Kulthum, I mean, they all had something to say about the world that they lived in. And I consider myself to have inherited that great tradition of music. And I think that music and artistic expression in general can move people more than even just the emptiness and the banality of words and abstract thoughts. Music is a lot more tangible. Music is something you can, store on your phone and listen to, when you feel like it. A film is something you can look at when you want. It's very tangible. It's one of those. It's the tangibility of it, I think, does a great deal to the psyche and the consciousness of people. And I think that every musician, I think that every artist has a responsibility to, say what they have to say about their environment. And my favorite musicians, I listed some of them, like Curtis Mayfield, Bill Withers, or Tribe Called Quest, or Coltrane, Beethoven. These cats all did that. Nina Simone, and I think we as humanity here, we should be grateful to them for that.
What was your experience like growing up as a Pakistani Indian Muslim in America and specifically in Chicago?
It was good. I mean, it was great. I think, a really wonderful upbringing. Because I grew up, I think, in a family that I think took the best things that Islam had to offer and infused that within us. And some of the outdated things and some of the things that didn't necessarily apply to us, kind of left that at the door. I grew up in a secular household, where we appreciated our Muslim past, but embraced our Indianness a lot. I mean, for me, I always thought of myself as Indian before I was Muslim. I always thought of myself as American before I was Muslim, because I think that that was to me, that was more prevalent in my life. I spoke Urdu, I spoke Hindi. I had grandparents who didn't speak English. I had to communicate with them. And my grandparents were completely unassimilated people coming from India, and gave me such a sense of appreciation for like the motherland. And all these 8 or 9 times that my parents dragged us to take us to India, and we had to deal with the mosquitoes and the lack of sanitation, all these things. Maybe I didn't appreciate it then, but like I do now, because it made me embrace my brownness. My brownness has been more prevalent than my Muslimness, and I feel very, very lucky to have come from that sort of background. My grandparents practiced what I believe to be Vedic Islam, and by that I mean the Islam that existed in India before the Mughal invaders like Aurangzeb and Mahmud Ghaznavi and Muhammad bin Qasim, these bloodthirsty, demonic men who came and pillaged and looted and raped India and set a bad precedent and continue to be revered by Muslims in India. I don't know why, but my grandparents rejected all of that and embraced the Islam where Hindus and Muslims and Christians and Sikhs and Buddhists and all just gelled and vibed really well together. I mean, my grandparents, they rejected the ideals of the Muslim League about the creation of Pakistan. They said, no, we're Hindus and Muslims, we should all live together. We should all, we should all continue on a path of harmony. And their own families got split up, and some of them decided they'd go to Pakistan. My grandparents said, you guys go ahead. We're going to stay right here. This is our hood. This is our neighbor. This is our block. This is our city. This is our country. They paid the price. My grandfather's shop was burned down in the violence that happened between Hindus and Muslims. Even in spite of that, had no resentment, had no ill will, and continued to foster not tolerance. It was acceptance. Tolerance means you just tolerate people even though you think you're better than them. For them it was, and with my parents too, it was like, we're not better than any of them. We're not the chosen people. We happen to come from this. We could have easily been that. My dad's ancestors were Hindus, and I'm proud of that. And I consider myself more of a global citizen, really, when it comes to all of these things. So basically, the desiness and the brownness was a lot more prevalent in my life, and I've kind of expounded on this Vedic Muslim tradition that didn't come through these Mughal invaders. That came through the Yemeni traders that went to South India, and the Hindu king gave them refuge and built the first masjid probably in the history of Islam. And people dispute that because they want to discredit it, but a Hindu king gave these Muslims refuge. And why do I know all this? Because my grandparents told me this. My parents told me this. And I believe in a version of Islam that and that is unfortunately not the mainstream nowadays. I think that we need to embrace secularism if we want to move forward. Religion and politics have no place together. They should be separate. And anyway, these are all the ideals with which I grew up with, and I'm really proud of that. The Islam to me that I consider my Islam is the one of my grandparents. Like I said, they were the ones. When I think of the ideal Muslim, I think of those two cute people, those two, that woman with gnarled hands who would, touch my face and bless me, and my grandfather who would grab my forehead and kiss me and give me du'as and blow on me, which is also a Hindu tradition, and the ones who loved music, they loved ghazal, they loved qawwali, they loved filmi geet, like film songs, and my grandmother actually liked Elvis too. So I've heard. I don't know. I mean, I wasn't around for that, but she's like, "Yo, he's the guy that did the thing with his hips or whatever," my grandmother when her health was declining, and when we kind of knew that she was going to, leave this world. I mean, she left me with a lot of things to think about, and she said, I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of the boy that I raised, and now, beta, habibi, you have a choice. You can be one of these artists that, espouses licentiousness and titillation and vice and lust, or you can be somebody like an Amir Khusro. Like she said, my grandma used to always tell me, she's like, these bearded mullahs that did not spread Islam in India. It's the Sufi musicians and the saints, the Nizamuddin awliyas, the Hazrat Amir Khusros, these are the ones that spread, and they spread it through qawwali, they spread it through music, And she said, you have the opportunity to be an Amir Khusro, and I'll never forget that. And that's, for me, being a Muslim, inheriting, that's the tradition that I inherit.
You've sung for 2 past presidents, Jimmy Carter and Barack Obama. What was that experience like?
Oh, it was quite an honor. I mean, first for President Jimmy Carter, who I dig him a lot. I think he's really just a wonderful guy, and I think it's amazing what he's done in his post-presidency. Even during his presidency, I thought that he was quite a guy, quite a statesman. And I mean, for me, I guess particularly he liked classical music. I knew that because he was the first president to televise nationally, recitals of Leontyne Price and Vladimir Horowitz, the classical pianist, and I had the records of these people, so I thought he was really cool for that. And so it was, given all that, just thought it was such a treat to perform, and not only just perform the national anthem, before he spoke, but then, once he got up on the podium, he said, "I just want to say that," before I go on with before I say anything, he said, I just want to say I've never heard a more beautiful rendition of the Star Spangled Banner than the one we heard. And I thought, gee, that's something, because this guy probably heard quite a few renditions of it, So that was cool. And then, of course, to be at the White House performing for President Obama was the ultimate honor. I met him when I was a kid in Chicago. He came to my masjid, and I remember meeting him, shaking his hand, and when he was running for senator, and I remember my father telling me, like, man, this guy's gonna do something. And so for me to go back and, I'm a grown man, and now he's, in the 8th year of his presidency, and it was kind of full circle, and it was really, really an honor to represent myself and my family and my community performing in the White House.
What advice would you give to Muslim youth growing up in America in today's society?
Secularism is your hope for the future. Embrace it, or you'll be sorry. We cannot, come into the West and exist here and not embrace secularism. You can't have it both ways. If you want to succeed in this country, if you want to really contribute to it, embrace secularism, embrace your culture, embrace the language of your parents, embrace your cuisine, embrace the great things, your great traditions, and for God's sakes, stop depending on imams and mullahs and maulanas to tell you how to live your life. You have the ability to reason. You have the regency. You have more power than you even realize to make your own decisions and to decide what is right and wrong. And I have a lot of hope for you, and I have I'm interested to see what you'll do.